Hi everyone, my name is Tommy Pombriand. I'm a master's student at the University of Manitoba, and I'll be presenting on the foraging behavior and diet of bowhead whales. Bowhead whales are a special marine mammal as they are the only baleen whale species endemic to the Arctic. They are filter feeders that feed exclusively on zooplankton in the water column. The bowhead whale, or hartvik, has a cultural, spiritual, and subsistence importance and has been a key component in the thriving of Arctic indigenous peoples for hundreds of years. There are two populations of bowhead whales indicated in Arctic. So in the Western Arctic, we have in the blue on this map, the Bering Chukchi Beaufort population, while in the Eastern Arctic, we have in green, the Eastern Canada and West Greenland population, which was studied here. So with climate change, the disproportional warming of the Arctic has resulted in a decrease in the thickness and the extent of the sea ice cover, as well as changes in oceanographic conditions, which induces large-scale changes in zooplankton composition and abundance. But the question is, how will bowhead whales cope with these changes in prey? So one way they can cope with these changes is by having diet variation in the population, so diet differences between the individuals, and I can illustrate that with a simple and concrete example here. Let's say that there is no diet variation and all individuals in the population all feed on one unique prey, and that this prey either shifts its distribution or decreases in abundance, while all individuals in the population will be negatively affected by this change. However, if there is some variation in diet between the individuals and that the same thing happens to that prey, well, only a small portion of the population will be negatively affected. And at the population level, the impact would be lesser. So observing variation in diet of bowhead whales is crucial, but understanding what drives that variation is also very important. That scenario that is pictured here has already been observed in previous studies where diet variation was observed. But they could not attribute any mechanisms responsible for the diet variation between the individuals. So there was no significant effect of the sex, age, and size of the whales on their diet variation. So in the study, we tested another potential mechanism responsible for the diet variation, which is the individual's foraging behavior. So where and how they acquire their food. To test that, a total of 16 bowhead whales were tagged and samples in the communities of Igloolik and Pang with the help of local guides and collaborators between 2012 and 2016. So I didn't have personally the chance to participate in that fieldwork back then. The bowheads, they were equipped with satellite tags that allowed us to get information on their horizontal movements between regions and also vertical movements in the water column as they feed to dive. To feed. So those movements were recorded for the seasons of summer and fall following the tagging, as this is when most of the foraging occurs. So while tagging, we were also collecting a small biopsy sample of skin and blubber from which we measured stable isotope ratios. So that's a type of chemical biomarker that can allow us to characterize the diet composition, or in our case, measure diet differences between individuals within about the past year of their life. So once again, in the study, we found significant diet variation between individuals in the population with no effect of their sex, age, or size. So for those of you not familiar with stable isotopes, so we can project the values of all individuals in a two-dimensional space in which individuals with similar diets will be close to each other and the distance will increase between individuals as their diets differ. So for the whales that were tagged in Fox Basin, we see that they mostly group in the top right corner, while the whales from Cumberland Sound mostly group in the bottom left corner, which suggests that the region where they were tagged plays an important role in the diet differences between individuals. If we compare those results with results from previous studies, the higher ratios of Fox Basin bowhead whales could suggest higher proportions of carnivorous copepods, mysids, and ketone nets in their diet, while the lower ratios of Cumberland Sound bowhead whales could be associated with higher proportions of herbivorous copepods, such as Mitridiolenca and the Calanus. So we see that the diet variability is tightly coupled with the region where tagging occurred. But if we bring it back to the foraging behavior and look at the where component of it with the horizontal movements of the whales between regions, We see that the whales that were tagged in Fox Basin, they were actually very mobile. So after being tagged, they transited north through Gulf of Boothia towards Lancaster Sound and Admiralty Inlet before heading back south at the end of the summer, and finally down Fox Basin towards Hudson Strait in November to prepare for overwintering in Hudson Strait. But in Cumberland Sound, the whales, they stayed in the region for the whole summer and fall, only starting their movement south towards Hudson Strait in late November. So this use of different habitats during the summer and fall suggests that foraging behavior does influence the differences in diet. So now, do the whales from different regions also display differences in how they acquire their food underwater? Well, the results suggest that they in fact, do things differently. So here we have the depth of feeding diets for the 16 individuals included in this study. So that's for the summer and fall following the tagging once again. So on the left, we have the 8 individuals from Fox Basin that generally performed shallower feeding dives than the 8 whales from Cumberland Sound on the right. And those regional differences in dive depth were also reflected seasonally. So if we plot the feeding dives by month to see the evolution of them through the months of summer and fall, another interesting pattern emerges. So we see that the Fox Basin individuals show an increase in their dive depth as the months go by, diving deeper in the fall compared to the summer. But for the Cumberland Sound individuals, the average dive depth is quite constant through the months, but with high variability in dive depth within each month. So we see here we see 2 distinct foraging strategies adopted by individuals exploiting different summer foraging habitats. So in Fox Basin, the vertical distribution of prey is more likely to have induced this change. We know that their diet probably had higher proportions of mysids and ketone nuts. So in July and August, they probably were feeding on surface aggregations of those prey along with copepods as well. While in September to November, they probably followed the descent of diapause and copepods. In Cumberland Sound, they mainly fed on herbivorous copepods, and the variability observed within each month could be attributed to a multi-depth foraging strategy and also the diel-vertical migration of copepods in the water column. And we'll have a closer look at those foraging strategies. So some zooplankton species, and specifically Canonus copepods, they undergo this annual cycle of vertical migration. So as we see here in the summer and fall, newborn copepods, they feed on phytoplankton to develop and store energy in the form of lipids before descending to enter a diapause for the winter. And this downward movement of very energetic prey that's full of lipids is reflected in the increase in feeding dive depth of bowheads, which is a strategy also that has already been documented for the species. For the high variability in dive depth within each month in Cumberland Sound, a multi-depth foraging strategy has been documented. So when there was 2 hotspots of zooplankton biomass in the water column, as indicated by the red spots in this graph, so there was a large aggregation at around 200 meter deep and also one near the surface. Well, the bowhead whales, they were alternating between both patches in their dives, which is reflected in the depth of their feeding dives in this graph hereby. So we really see like the targeting of the 2 patches. So the specific behavior could partially explain the variability in dive depth within each month. And another complementary explanation is that bowhead whales were also following the diel-vertical migration of zooplankton. So during the day, to avoid the predation from visual predators like carnivorous zooplankton or fish, copepods, especially like the Canonus species, will move to deeper waters and wait for the night to move towards the surface to feed on phytoplankton when the predation risk is a bit lesser. So this daily movement was also reflected in the feeding dive depth of bowhead whales that were diving deeper during the day and shallower at night. So to conclude, we showed that diet variability was associated with differences in where and how certain individuals feed during the summer and fall. The results suggest some sort of like group specialization where the individuals from one particular region all behave similarly, but they behave differently than the individuals that are from another region still in the same population. So there's still some unanswered question as to why that's the case, but the variability in diet and foraging behavior observed in our study shows good ecological plasticity and also good potential to cope with current and future changes in prey. So to end this presentation, I'd like to thank my colleagues and co-authors for their help and support, our collaborators in the communities of Igloolik and Peng for their help and expertise on the field, and the different funding agencies that funded my work and this research. And I'll be happy to take any questions at this moment.